I'm Josh Christensen.
I'm Brian Lufkin.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, Fast Company staff writer Pavithra Mohan.
They are letting go of middle management, I think, with the assumption that eventually AI can replace some of those functions as well.
Entrepreneur and author Faisal Hoque.
Now we're saying, well, if I want to write, maybe I don't need to write, I can just outsource it. If I need to think, maybe I don't need to think, I can outsource it, right?
And as always, keeping tabs.
I mean, that's the real story. What is the zoo going to do to address this toxic workplace?
But first, here's the download. The news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
The Supreme Court ruled last Friday that President Trump's tariffs are illegal. Trump called the decision, quote, ridiculous, but said that he has, quote, numerous other ways to move forward. He then announced a new 10% global tariff in response and claimed later on Truth Social that it could be increased to 15%. Meanwhile, the government needs to refund the $134 billion of revenue it brought in from Trump's tariffs before they were rendered illegal. But it's unclear how long that will take or how it will play out. And some businesses are getting antsy, with FedEx announcing on Monday it's going to sue the U.S. government for a, quote, full refund.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Clearly, I'm not a lawyer of any sort, but just when they were like, the tariffs are illegal, and he followed it up immediately by being like, okay, I'm going to put this tariff on. I don't know how that works, and maybe it is still illegal. This tariff might be illegal as well, but it's all tariff law seems like something we should take a harder look at.
I mean, here's the thing.
I'm so confused, Brian.
I'm definitely not gonna get a tax refund this year, but I'm sure as hell we're not gonna get a tariff refund.
Oh no!
Where's our tariff refunds, Josh?
That's not coming back to us anytime
we gotta
soon.
Kiss that goodbye.
On Tuesday, for more Trump news, Trump delivered an 1 hour and 47-minute long State of the Union address. I didn't actually check how long the State of the Union was until I read this.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Listen, that is a feature-length movie.
Well, no, because if it were a feature-length movie in the year 2026, it would be 3 hours and 47 minutes.
I love a 90-minute romp. Just give me a
absolutely.
90-minute movie. Every time I go see a Broadway show or an off-Broadway show, and I see in the program no intermission and 85 minutes,
You're like, yes,
hell yeah,
settle in. Well, I hope you were settled in for the Sodu.
Oh, I did not watch the entirety. I caught the highlights in the morning. He, of course, in his State of the Union address, defended his tariffs and criticized the Supreme Court ruling, which we just talked about, though he didn't attack the justices the way he did on Truth Social. He defended his immigration policies and continued to double down on false and racist statements about the Somali community in Minnesota. He also made some exaggerated and at times completely untrue statements about the economy, jobs, and inflation, claiming that prices were plummeting when inflation has largely remained the same, claiming that he'd secured $18 trillion in investments into the U.S. This is exaggerated at best, even if you have an extremely broad definition of what secured investments means. The speech was also light on new economic policy proposals, though he did propose ideas around retirement accounts and tech companies taking on more of the energy costs associated with data centers. I kept seeing on X, it doesn't matter overall, but on X it's just okay, Republicans, this was a barn burner, greatest speech ever. Liberals, this was terrible, this was awful. Meanwhile, did you see Baylor Shireman got 11 rebounds for the Celtics last night?
Yes.
Because that's what I was watching.
Look at priorities are in the right place. Do you remember in States of the Union and the Obama, it was one of the Obama ones where he said something and then someone in the crowd goes you lie.
Oh yeah.
And everyone's oh, that's nothing with what today is all about.
Honestly, people were up in arms about the you lie back when that happened. I don't know. I couldn't care about that. Couldn't care about people yelling who claps, who stands, who sits during the State of the Union.
Clapping in the standing.
It's the worst piece of theater you'll ever go to see.
Meta is going to be buying up to $100 billion worth of AI chips from semiconductor company AMD to develop its AI technology and power its data centers. The company has also said that Meta can buy up to 10% of AMD stocks. AMD struck a similar deal with OpenAI last October, where OpenAI could buy up to 160 million shares and use AMD's chips, which could be seen as an attempt to catch up to NVIDIA in the competition. Now, this all comes at a time where Meta is not really having the best look when it comes to AI, with its big investments and a chaotic strategy that have still left them behind their rivals. And it didn't help when on Sunday, the company's director of alignment at its superintelligence labs posted on X that she lost control of the AI agent OpenClaw and it ended up doing a, quote, speed run of deleting her inbox.
It's quite literally a plot line in Silicon Valley. Like the son of Anton AI that Anton launches deletes all of their code.
Yeah.
And this is what we're doing at Meta. Cool, it's great.
Right, yeah, and this
great.
is like, and that's what people online were saying. They were like, hey, well, I mean, she's like an expert in AI security, and if it even pulled one over on her, then us normies are effed.
You're right, Brian. I don't feel bad for falling for that phishing scam.
You know what? Look, just because I clicked on the link that said, click on this or else we're going to drain you of your entire bank account. And then I clicked on it and then bad things happened. You know what? I don't know what's going on half the time.
Many of my closest friends are Nigerian princes.
Look, it's fine.
And let's move on to our next story. We're back with the latest on Warner Brothers Discovery. You know we can't do a newscast without it. It's the story that will not end. So Paramount, in its bidding war against Netflix, just raised its bid to $31 a share. Warner Brothers has been resistant to Paramount's bids to date, but they are giving this one some thought. On Tuesday, they announced that if the board decides that Paramount's offer is superior, Netflix will have 4 days to come up with a new one.
How do you think this
Leverage
is all
that
going to
deal.
play out?
I think it ends with Netflix.
You think? You don't think it's going to be
acquiring it.
Paramount?
I think Netflix is fairly committed to matching an offer. I mean, I don't know. Who am I to say?
Yeah.
But Ted Sarandos has been pretty salty in his back and forth in this deal. Like, came out and made some public statements about David Ellison and Paramount. And so I don't think they're walking away from the table anytime soon.
Well, they're not the only bigwigs that have some interesting things to say, because this week the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, says that he's seeing some similarities between today and the lead up to the 2008 financial crisis. At the firm's annual investor day on Monday, which, by the way, was in person and on the day that New York City got 2 feet of snow, he said, quote, unfortunately, we did see this in 05, 06, 07, almost the same thing, and then said, quote, I don't know how long it's going to be great for everybody. I see a couple of people doing some dumb things. He didn't specify who he meant, though this comes while tech companies are spending billions on developing AI on borrowed money and growing fears of an AI bubble.
See a newscast item about installing OpenClaw on your computer a few news items ago.
Whoops.
And that's the news you need to know today. So, Brian.
Yes.
What is the worst job you've ever had? You don't need to dox
geez.
anyone. You can you can use vagaries, but
Oh,
I want to
man.
know the dirt.
I mean, I've been through some crazy shit. Okay, so I'm thinking back to, speaking of 2008 financial crisis, working at the mall, right? Part-time. It was like right after college maybe. And yeah, I mean, I guess I won't say the place where it was, but the return desk was crazy. People coming in, this one woman started sobbing because I wouldn't allow her to return $4.99 worth of masking tape because she had used a check to purchase it, and that was something about it. She was like, this is ridiculous. And then, okay, this was at a like home improvement chain, and then there was one day where they were like, Brian, you get to go and do the register in the garden center today. And I'm thinking, oh, that's nice. It's like outside, like surrounded by like flowers or whatever, right? Like that sounds pleasant. my friend. It was not pleasant. So by the way, this is at like 6 a.m. And this woman comes up to me and I can immediately be like, oh boy, here comes trouble. And she goes, I'm looking for like da-da-da-da. She was looking for a brand of cow manure, like a fertilizer for her garden. She's like, I'm looking for this. And I'm going all around and then I check in the system and we don't have it. I'm like, I'm so sorry, ma'am. We're actually out of it. And she goes, first of all, do you know what Menards is? Are there any Midwesterners listening? Menards is basically like Lowe's, Home Depot kind of place.
Oh, okay.
And I go, I'm so sorry, ma'am. We're out of that cow manure. And she goes, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to Menards. And she storms out. And I'm standing there. Can't believe I just got cussed out. By the way, these people think that like, lady, I don't care where you buy your fertilizer. You know what I mean? And by the way, this major corporation that I work at is going to be just fine wherever you go, Menards or elsewhere, and I'm going to be just fine. It was stuff like that happened like multiple times a day, every day.
Yeah.
That I was just like, oh boy, really, really working for this minimum wage.
God, that reminds me of this comedian who had this bit of like what cashiers really want to say working at IKEA. And it's just like him with like a fake IKEA background in there. And someone would say something like that. It's like, well, looks like I'm going to take my money elsewhere. And then like a beat would drop to some sinister music and he'd just go, do it. Do it. I don't care.
You. I'm telling all my friends not to shop here. Tell them. You think I want 5 other yous running around the store? Have them call me, I'll tell them. You think you hate this place more than me? I work here.
I want you to shop somewhere else.
Another time I was working at, this is actually the best summer job of all time. Do you remember the Sharper Image?
Yeah, of course.
Gadgets, tech store, right? Okay, so they have a very similar competitor called Brookstone, which you're probably also familiar with.
Love a Brookstone.
They dominate a Sky Mall. Does Sky Mall even exist anymore? Shout out Sky Mall.
Yeah, that magazine doesn't exist anymore, but I just remember Brookstones from my local mall at the Providence Place Mall and just going there as a mall kid teen and sitting in the massage chairs.
That's exactly what the Lord intended because that's what you're supposed to do. By the
I
way,
don't think anyone actually buys anything.
Oh no,
from
absolutely not. Sharper Image went bankrupt, you know, like because these teens killing time before their date to go see Fast and the Furious 2 are just sitting sweating in the massage chairs that they're not going to buy. And I have to be like, you guys need help finding anything? But so anyway, this woman comes in one time and she's like, I need to return this clock. This is just not working out for me. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, but ma'am, and I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy because it's in a Brookstone box. And I'm like, and I'm so sorry, we can't return this. And she goes, what do you mean? And I go, well, it's Brookstone, this product. And she looks at me like I'm insane. And she goes, you are Brookstone. And I'm like, okay. And to your point, like what the person really wants to say, I'm like biting my lip.
Not a Brookstone.
I'm like, okay, lady, I don't know if my name tag is a giveaway, the signage everywhere on the store, the 20-foot letters on the side of the building that you walked into to come in here and yell at me that say, the Sharper Image. I'm so sorry. This is not Brookstone. And she doesn't even apologize. Such a Karen. She storms out. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Get out of here.
Yeah, that's retail. I worked at a Walgreens. I've waited tables for a long time. This is just day in the life of a retail employee.
I think that
be nice to your retail employee.
Yeah, a billion %. Yes, 100%.
They're just trying their best.
Yes, and it's just like, I don't know. It's
or
really,
not. They're not getting paid enough to try their best.
Yeah, and frankly, like they don't get paid enough to deal with these freaks. You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like it's a real microcosm of humanity when people come in. Like, that's when I realized, like, wow, these strangers really feel entitled to say whatever they want to me. And I was just like, I don't have the spiritual bandwidth to deal with this. But the good news is it was really close to a Panda Express, and I love me some Panda, so that made up for it.
Well, let's transition into our next story. So whether you have a job, maybe at a Brookstone, whether you lost a job, maybe from a Panda Express, or you're looking for one, maybe at a Sharper Image.
That was really artful, by the
way. You've probably noticed that the job market is a little bit depressing right now. Revised data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that the economy added only 181,000 jobs in 2025. For comparison, in 2024, there were 1.4 million jobs added. We've also been hearing about layoffs from companies like Amazon, Meta, Pinterest, UPS, a number of others. And layoffs have largely been connected to AI rollouts, but there are other intricacies and larger currents driving a precarious labor market that we're going to get into in this next segment. So vibes overall, not great. Bryan, you lead our work-life section here at Fast Company, so I thought today was as good as any day to bring back Pavithra Mohan onto the show, who's a staff writer here at Fast Company, and talk to you both about the state of work, or the state of the workian? State of the union?
Of the workian.
State of the workian? Does that work?
Hold on. Wait, spell that for me. Spell workian.
I'm not going to spell it. Roll the tape. Hey, Pavithra, welcome to the show.
Hey, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so since we've got Bryan, our work-life editor, and our longtime work-life reporter here, I thought we would do a segment that I'm going to lovingly call How's Work Going So Far, which is the unofficial name of this segment and also very clumsy. How's work going so far? But I like it. So we're going to go over a whole bunch of stories that the work-life section here at Fast Company has been covering this year. There's a lot of them. It's been sort of a doozy so far. So I think we should jump right into the deep end and talk about AI, because that's the number one story on everyone's mind when it comes to knowledge work, white-collar work, and if we're going to be employable in the next few years or not. So Pavithra, can you just talk a little bit about the state of work life and AI so far in the job market this year?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to get into here. But I guess to start, I think most of us have seen how many companies have not only had layoffs recently, but have been citing AI in their layoffs. And I think what's sort of misleading about that narrative is just, yes, while AI is likely coming for all of our jobs eventually, at the moment, things are looking a little better. I mean, there isn't really any indication just yet that broadly people are losing jobs en masse to AI. And so I think the framing that we see from a lot of these companies that we have to do these layoffs because of automation, because of the efficiency that AI is going to bring, all of that is a little bit, I would say, misleading at the moment and not quite accurate, and isn't really being reflected in the actual employment data. So when you talk to economists,
It's a convenient excuse.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty convenient scapegoat. I think there are some very boring explanations for layoffs, right? The usual sort of economic headwinds. At the moment, I think things like tariffs and immigration policy and all of the political uncertainty is really playing a role. And I think it's easier for companies to blame it on AI rather than to say something President Trump is doing might be the actual reason or one of the driving factors behind layoffs. So I think it's not quite as bad as it might seem at the moment. But that being said, there are obviously some very real effects that certain workers are already feeling and that we will start to see more of.
Let's get into maybe some of those other headwinds a little bit more. What are economists saying are more likely the causes of, some of the record layoffs we've seen so far this year?
Yeah. I mean, before we jump into that, I do want to just say one of the things that economists are talking about is entry-level jobs and the impact there. So we are seeing AI kind of affecting those jobs in particularly tech and finance and some of these industries that are just a little bit more susceptible to disruption from AI. But coming to some of the other things that are happening right now, I mean, obviously, immigration is a huge issue at the moment that is very much affecting employment. I think that tends to get a little bit lost in the narrative, but it's very much the case that the overall employment picture is being affected by the decline in immigration, the slow job growth that we've been seeing over the last year, very much related to immigration as well. So one of the economists I spoke to for a recent story on AI being used as a bit of a scapegoat mentioned that in her eyes, immigration was actually really the leading issue that employers should be concerned about. So I think that's a big one. And then, of course, as we said, I think just general kind of economic headwinds, the fact that hiring is slow at the moment, people are staying in their jobs, there's just not a lot of turnover. I think all of that is also driving layoffs to some extent. So there's a variety of factors. I think AI is certainly in there, but it's not the sort of big headline the way it might look if you're just kind of glancing at the news.
I mean, I believe that some of these companies truly believe the way we when they cite AI as a cause for layoffs. Like, do you believe that in their calculus, they really are afraid of AI and they're trying to streamline their workflow or whatever it is, even though it's being used as a scapegoat? Do you think that the motive is true? Like, do you think that they really are citing it because they really are concerned, or do you really think that it's just full-blown smokescreen?
Oh, I think that they think that AI is going to affect jobs, right? I think there are the big tech companies that I think are financially invested in putting that narrative out there, right? They are creating some of this AI. They are very much like, I don't know, they're believers in it. I think it makes a lot of sense that you might see a Microsoft or even an Amazon citing AI. And then I think there's a lot of other companies that feel a lot of pressure to get up to speed on AI, to really have their workers sort of embrace it. And so I think they want to look like they're innovative and that they're like really leaning into this technology. So I feel like a little bit of both happening, but I do think a lot of employers genuinely believe like this is going to disrupt our workforce down the road. And maybe they're taking certain actions now and like citing it, even if they're not quite yet at a point where they can like fully automate some of those jobs, right? Like I think we know that there's only so many jobs that can be truly kind of automated at the moment.
Yeah, I think people underestimate the amount of impact like having to hop on an earnings call when we're talking about public companies or going to investors and needing to appear or convince your shareholders that you are being forward thinking and tightening your belts, and we're getting up to speed on AI and we're going to integrate that and find synergies, and it's going to cut our bottom line by X amount. I said synergies, Brian. Oh, I did.
I didn't realize that this was that kind of podcast.
But I mean, so much is just about making the street happy on some level that it gets mixed in with the AI hype that we see from, I think Sundar from Microsoft just came out, last week and was talking about another quote from an AI or tech exec being like, white collar and knowledge economy work's going to be wiped out in X amount of timeline.
Yeah.
And I feel like everyone's just becoming a little bit of Elon Musk when it comes to AI and making promises that just we've already blown past several times.
Yeah.
Not that it's not disrupting and changing a lot of things, but like the hype, the investor realities and shareholder realities, plus some of the actual technology is all mixed up in this like wibbly wobbly mess of uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, there's truth to all of it. I think that's what's challenging is like, yes, jobs are being impacted by this. I think there's a lot we still don't understand about what that's going to look like and also the ways in which it's already happening. Like there's some things that we just don't have data for, like how are jobs changing because of AI? We don't entirely know how the nature of certain jobs are changing, or we can't capture that at least in data. And I think it makes it difficult to talk about this in a nuanced way.
Pavithra, to your point, I think there's still so much we don't know. I mean, I think that, as we continue to have these conversations, one thing on in our work life coverage that we always talk a lot about is that this is a society like once in a generation shattering development, like up there with internet, television. So it's no wonder that we're still trying to like figure it out in real time, not even getting into the government regulation, the cultural adoption. It's just like such like a massive, huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate using the word disruption because I think it's cliche, but I think that, there's still a lot we don't know. And yet we're all living it as it happens.
It's a paradigm shifting technology.
Indeed.
If you will.
Certainly.
You mentioned immigration a little bit. I want to dive into that a little bit more. Could you talk about the impact of ICE deployment in cities across the U.S.? I think we saw some particular intersection with the private sector, shall we say, in Minneapolis and Minnesota, St. Paul. A lot of big companies based there. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think even if companies think that this is not an issue that affects them, I think the change in the sort of immigrant workforce, migrant workers being scared to go to work, I mean, I think all of that does very much affect employers. And like I said, it is actually showing up even in the data, just in terms of job growth. Unemployment is still creeping up despite immigrant workers sort of leaving the workforce. So I think there's a lot of things that people might think of as not really sort of affecting their day-to-day, but it very much does. And I think we saw this in Minnesota, specifically Minneapolis, with the deployment of ICE officers there and the violence there. And what's interesting is that sort of intersects with this other trend we've seen in the last few years, which is that companies have been really hesitant to speak out on political issues. I think the Trump administration has made very clear that, they will potentially target you in some way, that there might be legal retribution. I think they've kind of scared a lot of companies into just not really wanting to touch politics as an issue. And what's interesting is that we have seen what I would call a pretty muted response from certain CEOs in Minnesota and also leaders elsewhere. But it does seem as though what we see as kind of muted is actually sort of notable because companies have been so quiet over the last few years. So even seeing these, 60-something leaders in Minnesota coming out and speaking out on the violence in any way, I think was a bit of a shift. I actually spoke to a USC professor recently about this, and he was saying that, again, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but really, if you sort of look at the longer history of political activism and corporate activism from companies and the private sector, it was a real about face over the last few years, especially after the 2020, racial reckoning, after George Floyd's murder. I think we saw companies get very vocal in that time, and they were under a lot of pressure from employees to speak out, and we did see a real shift from there. And so I think what's happening now is interesting. We'll see if we continue to hear from companies on this issue. But yeah, it's been, I think, notable to see them speaking out at all.
It's pretty dark. I think we can all agree this is probably one of the most or toughest work-life topics to cover. I'm sure you feel it. Although, Pavithra, you cover the dark side of work life quite a bit.
I certainly do. Very much my specialty.
So you're deep into it, but then other parts of our work life are productivity tips and stuff that's a little lighter fare, shall we say. Bryan, you had an interesting story about so-called, heavy scare quotes here, super manager. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, and Josh, I know you're probably thinking this has nothing to do with X-Men or superheroes or that's where my 90s cartoon brain goes, but our great reporter Lindsay Dodgson wrote a story for us about the rise of something called a super manager. When we talk about how the labor market's kind of changing right now, I mean, what we're seeing is a lot of, especially in regards to all of these layoffs that are constantly making headlines. On the work-life section, we've talked about how we've had the most layoffs since pandemic era 2020. It's been very bad. One of the groups that is affected by this, interestingly enough, is middle management. So, the reasons for this are because, again, there's lots of forces. It's leadership churn, it's AI, but basically, companies are trying to figure out, as usual, how to do less with more. So they end up targeting middle managers. A Gallup survey showed that, it was published last month from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, found that the average number of reports of direct reports managers have increased from 10.9 in 2024 to 12.1 in 2025. Although, I mean, that's obviously averages because you can't be managing less than a round number of a human being. But basically, what's happened is that these middle managers have been removed from the workforce, and increasingly the managers that remain have more direct reports, and they have to do more with less. And of course, this can lead to more burnout. This can lead to organizational problems in the workforce, in the specific organization. Managers just have bigger teams to manage now, basically, if this trend is to continue. So, we talk a lot about, okay, well, how can we best address that? And of course, it's not easy. And it's also, obviously, as usual, a more systemic answer. So, a lot of this has to do with how can companies support managers? Because, by the way, a lot of the times we talk about, I know in this case, we're talking about how middle managers are often getting the axe, but a lot of times leaders at all organizations, when we use the term leaders, we think of oh, these are C-suite level people who are used to making these decisions and all this stuff. But it still takes a lot to have to manage people. Not everyone has sort of the innate skill. So especially when you're being asked to adapt to these sort of unreasonable conditions and having to manage more people. So if organizations can really support managers in the best possible way, that's something that really needs to stay front of mind as this trend continues to develop.
I wonder if any part of this is sort of the imitation game. I think flat org chart structures have come a little bit more into vogue because I think most famously NVIDIA arguably the most successful company in the world right now, has a very flat org chart structure under Jensen Huang. So I wonder how much of this is just imitation. Like, well, if it works for NVIDIA, let's put on a leather jacket and have a flat org structure.
I'm thinking of also Amazon really desperately wanting to be a flatter organization, and how this all ties back to AI as well, right? They are letting go of middle management, I think, with the assumption that eventually like AI can replace some of those functions as well. But I think you're certainly right, Josh, that there's some amount of like, look, that company's been really successful doing things that way, so maybe we should try it too.
God, nothing would pain me more. I have a number of direct reports here, but it's not 12 or 12.1. God, that would be a nightmare if I had that many direct reports or more.
Can you imagine?
Oh, God. Brian, there was an interesting story Work Life had last week about people with ADHD and how they can thrive in the age of AI. Tell us about that.
Our great reporter, Jared Linson, who covers this beat a lot for us, neurodivergence, but ADHD specifically, it's really heartening because there's been a lot of increased discourse recently, I feel, in terms of how to make workplaces more neurodivergent, or just more pressured for companies to do this, particularly around ADHD. That's something actually Jared did another story for Work Life where he interviewed Paris Hilton. She has ADHD and she made an ADHD friendly work environment and is very much an advocate. I encourage everyone to look up that story as well. But yeah, AI and ADHD. So Jared wrote this story about how the ADHD is a perfect pairing for AI. And the reason for that is because AI can both help ADHDers with, for example, things that they often struggle with, like routine processes, time management, processing, organizing large volumes of information. Obviously, if you outsource that to a robot, it's going to be able to do a good job. But at the same time, and this is something that we've talked a lot about. It's like, okay, well, what can AI not do? It's all of the human skills, right? Like things like abstract thinking, creative problem solving. All of these are areas where ADHDers really excel at naturally. So this article is looking at how AI can there can be a sort of like a complementary relationship here. So rather than sitting still and paying attention for long periods in an academic lecture or meeting, an AI software can record that information, transcribe it, highlight key points. That's really helpful for ADHDers or, for anybody really. And then ADHDers often thrive as entrepreneurs, which is that's actually another story that we've done in the work life section. Skills that align with communication, creative problem solving. These are tasks that AI can't yet do or do as well as a human being. And yeah, workers with ADHDers, they can really capitalize on these natural strengths while using AI to make up for perhaps some of the things they struggle with in the workplace.
Another interesting piece that's been published recently in the work life section is about the challenges at work for middle-aged women and women in menopause. Can we talk more about that?
After 50, we see a lot of women who become trapped in sort of low quality jobs, or they exit the labor market altogether, and they're chalking it up to this phenomenon called the menopause penalty. So it means, it's like let the women earn less and have fewer opportunities after being diagnosed with menopause. So the story looks at that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's a bit of it's like similar to the motherhood penalty that's talked about a lot, which affects a lot of women earlier in their careers. And I think there's an interesting parallel there with the quote unquote menopause penalty. And I feel like they're also very related in that I'm not saying that everyone who goes through menopause has also experienced motherhood, but I do think in many cases, what we're probably seeing is women who do become parents are taking a bit of a step back, or they're being forced to kind of take a step back earlier in their careers. And I think part of what's happening, even with the menopause penalty, is probably related to that and sort of exacerbated by that. And I actually wrote recently about the topic of matrescence, which is essentially the kind of transformation that women go through after they've had a child and experienced pregnancy and childbirth. And something that came up there was that very often I think companies look at someone who's a new parent and assume that they need, to take a step back, or that they can't do as much, but that actually later in their career, they might be more sort of freed up when their kids are older and they do actually have more time to take on more in the workplace. And so I think this is all kind of related to that as well, in that if you sideline women earlier in their careers, chances are it's going to end up hurting them later on as well, or they might exit the labor force in the meantime. And I don't know, I think it feels like a very sort of parallel issue to me. And I am sort of hopeful in that we are talking more about things like menopause. I mean, there are companies that offer menopause benefits now. So I do think the conversation has shifted, and that's kind of nice to see.
One final topic we have to cover in our work life roundup: DEI policy retreat. A lot has been talked about and written about over the past year since the new Trump administration came in. How is that still playing out in the labor market?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually very much related to what we were just talking about. But I think if we're looking at the big picture, like corporate DEI retreat that we've seen, it kind of goes back to the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action back in 2023. And I think since then, we've just sort of seen this cascading effect and seen more and more companies pull back. And then once Trump came into office, he really made a point of targeting corporate DEI initiatives through a series of executive orders, and he has just really made that a priority. And so we've seen companies just completely walk back their DEI commitments from just, a few years ago, let's say 2020, 2021, when they were claiming to be really committed to this issue. And I will say, there is a bit of nuance that I think is lost when we talk about the quote unquote DEI retreat. I wouldn't say that every company is really, really stepping away from it. I think some are using this as an excuse to just stop investing in DEI. But I do think there are other companies that are just doing it a little more quietly, and they're no longer using the language of DEI, which has very much been weaponized at this point. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think it is fair to say that by and large, there is just less energy behind this. I think people don't want to be out there vocally talking about DEI at this point. And, we're seeing the effects of this already. I think there's already evidence that this shift has kind of impacted certain groups of workers. We were just talking about women in the workplace. I think it's being shown to have affected Black women in particular, because there have been a lot of cuts to DEI rules at the federal level. The federal layoffs that Trump issued last year really did affect certain groups of workers just due to their being overrepresented in the federal workforce. And so Black women were among those workers who were more disproportionately affected. And then I think just the reality of companies cutting these roles and cutting these DEI teams, it is true that women and people of color do tend to hold those roles more frequently. And so when you're kind of targeting those teams, it makes sense that we'd see the effects of that in the workforce. And so as companies have dialed back flexible work policies as well, we've seen some other similar effects on working mothers who've been dropping out of the workforce in higher numbers over the last year. So I think we're starting to see the effects of this pullback, and I suspect we will continue to see more of that. And another thing I should just mention here is that the EEOC, which is the federal agency.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up.
Yeah, it's very much the federal agency that is supposed to enforce anti-discrimination laws. And their entire mission has kind of shifted under the Trump administration and under the new chair of the EEOC. She's made clear that fighting DEI-related discrimination, as they're calling it, and pursuing these reverse discrimination cases, so white men who are claiming discrimination in the workplace, that is very much their focus now. And we're seeing that play out actually right now with a new investigation they've opened into Nike and the DEI policies at Nike and how they think that may or may not have discriminated against certain workers. So that case is going to be, I think, very interesting and one to watch, because depending on how that plays out, it could not only derail DEI efforts at large, but also set pretty dangerous precedent, I think, that could hurt a lot of other workers. So we'll see what comes of that. But I think at the moment, it is a pretty unprecedented move to kind of open this investigation into a company. And this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but it's not an investigation that was sparked by a complaint from a worker, which is a little unusual for the EOC. It's something that the commission has decided to look into. So again, I think kind of an interesting test case for the private sector on the issue of DEI.
Yeah, I think in the public consciousness, I think there's a lot of people who think of DEI just as some of the more performative aspects of it, like corporate language, and it's just become a euphemism. Then there's also a lot of people just straight up using it as a slur.
Totally.
But I'm still also interested. There's a number of public policy polling, so take from that what you will. But DEI is not wholly unpopular, even when put in that terms. Do you support DEI? It's a 50-50 issue. This is not an 80-20 thing or some sort of thing that I think has been successfully won. And then when you see the actual effects of it, of people losing their jobs and like very clearly racial or gender discrimination in the name of like anti-DEI, I think people are going like, wait, hold on, what's happening now?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that Nike case is going to be fascinating to see play out.
People are not always paying attention to the intricacies of like the EEOC's quorum and like who's the chair and what guidance they're putting out.
Oh, no idea.
Yeah, but I think actually there's a lot there that is really like important and instructive for employers. Like companies very much look at guidance that's put out by agencies like this to figure out what it is they need to be doing or how certain anti-discrimination laws are enforced. And like one example of this is they had this harassment guidance that was very, very broad and like really kind of looked at all of these different examples of how workplace harassment can show up. And a really important thing they did over the last few years was include for people who are gender nonconforming or trans, including guidance in there that really outlined like this is what harassment can look like against these types of workers. And again, under the new chair and under the Trump administration, they've actually walked back that guidance. And, there are real effects of this. I mean, it was important that they actually like wrote out these protections exist for these workers. And now they don't have that anymore. They've completely struck that from the harassment guidance. And actually they've struck the entirety of it now, which is quite astounding. But, there's like real effects of that for LGBTQ workers. If we're talking about inclusion in the workplace and DEI, it's not just the kinds of workers that I think people often think of when we talk about DEI. This is true of like so many different workers, right? Neurodivergent folks, like LGBTQ folks. So not to like get in the weeds on the EEOC guidance there, but I do think it's relevant. And again, it gets kind of ignored by people, but these are like small actions taken by a federal agency that really can affect workers on the ground. So
we'll be back with Pavithra for keeping tabs, but first a quick break, followed by Bryan's interview with Faisal Hoque. This week, Bryan, you sat down with longtime Fast Company contributor Faisal Hoque to talk about all things AI, particularly when it comes to work life and leadership. Faisal is an entrepreneur. He's a contributor to a number of publications, not just ours, and he is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author with 11 books about business, technology, and innovation. Bryan, could you ever imagine writing 11 books in your lifetime?
I can't imagine doing 11 of the same thing at all in my lifetime.
It's incredibly impressive. Like that's pushing some like Dean Koontz level of you're in Stephen King territory with that. But you're just like Faisal's just like shooting them out, like just in his sleep. It's like Stephen King just cranking out the hits. I think once you hit double-digit amount of books, that's super impressive. Because even impressive. One is like, by the way, listeners, like just so you know, like in writing a book is so, everyone. I have not written one personally, but everyone I know says it is like the most like all-encompassing, difficult labor of love. So super shout out to anyone who writes more than one. So you got into companies struggling to integrate AI, how it's going to affect rank and file employees from the C-suite down into entry-level employees as well. Lots about AI. We've talked about AI a bunch on this show already, so we're going to have more of it here. So here's Bryan's conversation with Faisal Hoque.
Well, Faisal, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but it turns out there's something called AI. That's like kind of a big deal now. But I'm really excited to chat with you today about AI because you are, of course, a longtime Fast Company contributor. And this is obviously very much in your wheelhouse and, consulting with different companies about how they can roll out AI, which kind of leads me to the first thing I want to talk to you about today. Everyone is trying to figure this out in real time, right?
Sure.
Like a lot of companies don't even have AI policy, or they're trying to like draft it in real time, or also trying to figure out how to even use this technology. Can you talk a little bit about how companies can better roll out AI? Because you've said that 70% can't figure it out or they fail.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about how companies can do this better in this time where everyone's kind of trying to figure it out in real time?
Let's start with that 70%. So the 70% number, actually, I think it's a BCG or McKinsey research output with HBR. And It's actually notes to last 25 years of transformational work that different companies have done, mostly large enterprise, but also public sector, the government agencies, because as we iterated different type of technology, not just AI, case after case after case, there's failures after failures after failures. Because most of the time what happens is every time some new technology comes in, we saw that when the internet was coming out, the browser came over, we saw that with mobility, cloud, et cetera, and now with AI. People get very much focused on technology without thinking through the ramification of technology and how it impacts their business model, their process, people, culture, et cetera, right? And if you look at the AI, if you look at the last 4 or 5 years, only less than 5% of the enterprises are actually getting any value. So there's a lot of activities in terms of pilots and experimentation, but they're not really generating a lot of financial value or the ROI they're looking for. So a couple of reasons why it happens. Most enterprises has never took the time to build any kind of change management system or the management system where you can approach change and transformation on an ongoing basis. So it's very episodical, like something happens and you react to it, right? So it starts there, and then you hire a whole slew of consultants from outside, or you send people to traditional executive education program, and it never really sticks. So AI has a different level of urgency, or the change is so fast to the point we were talking about the ads and the technology we were seeing, it's very difficult to keep up. So to really get value, what will have to happen is that you have to look at it as a holistic point of view. Who are you? What are you trying to do with technology? How it adds value to your customer? How it actually motivates the employee, not scare the employees? And then how do you really create a differentiating product and services utilizing AI as an enabler? That's when you can start looking at these things as a something that will stick. Otherwise, it's just going to go through a bunch of experimentation.
Yeah, because to your point, I feel like AI is just one of these culture, I'm not even talking about work culture. I'm talking about human culture, human society on level with the internet or smartphones, I don't know, TV or something. This is such a profound disruption just on how humans do things. So, it's kind of no wonder why a lot of companies struggle to sort of roll it out in a way that makes sense, or that, to your point, gives them a return on their investment.
Never before in human history we have had any kind of technology where we can outsource, our brains to a certain extent, right? It's like a synthetic being that we're creating, and it's going to do a lot of the things that we do. So if you look at the previous technology, it was always like a technology that helps us to do stuff better, faster, cheaper, whatever the case may be. Now we're saying, well, if I want to write, maybe I don't need to write. I can just outsource it. If I need to think, maybe I don't need to think. I can outsource it, right? Or if I actually wanted to do something, then I can give this work to an agent, and the agent does the work. So we're creating these digital entities that's going to be part of our workforce, right? So that creates a whole different way of thinking and doing, right? And it creates opportunity, but it also creates a lot of challenges culturally, mind shift, the way we assign work, the way we think of work, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, how a lot of companies approach it sort of I think you used the word episodic, right? Where it's maybe just dun, 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 we're rolling out AI, but you're saying that, maybe it's something that companies do with some sort of frequency or metered out sort of procedure. Is that fair to say, or could?
Yeah, look, with any kind of new technology, there's lots of opportunities, right? So you have to almost create a portfolio of opportunities, right? And you have to look at reward, but also have to look at risk. And based on that reward risk portfolio approach, you can decide which one to really take beyond experimentation and which one to shut down. So and there's a philosophical and psychological thought process that goes into it. So simple example, I can say, hey, I want to have a chatbot that becomes my customer service rep and is going to deal with the customer. That's one way of thinking. Another way of thinking is I have customer rep that are very good with people, but if I arm them with a knowledge management system that gives them the better way to handle the customer, maybe it's a better way to do it because people still prefer dealing with people, and it's a human-centric design principle that you're applying versus a system or a technology-centric design that where I'm going to replace those people that are actually doing the customer service. Because at the end of the day, I make this argument repeatedly, and I wrote a couple of pieces about this. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, who are we trying to serve?
Yeah.
Because if we are trying to really elevate humanity, then we have to design systems and application that elevates each of our potential, not completely replace us. Because if we replace all of us, there'll be no economy because there'll be no one to buy anything that anybody builds, right?
Yeah.
And, there's all sorts of argument that, well, we don't need to work because somehow economy will change or somehow we're going to have this base income model, whatever. But in the near future, if you look at next 3-5 years, if we don't get into the mindset of enabling humanity versus replacing the humanity, I think most of the enterprises, but economy as a whole, is going to be in trouble.
Could you talk a little bit about what human-centered design even means, like in practical terms?
Sure. Look, I mean, the term human-centric design, it's not a new term. It was around in the industrial era. It has been around in the digital era as well. In a simplest term, all it means is that you design things that are usable, that actually helps us to do stuff, right? So in the context of AI, why it has become in the forefront, because it's almost like, is it AI versus humanity or is it humanity plus AI? And the human-centric design help us to think about humanity first, then the digital resource, right? So that example that I was just talking about, that customer service rep, do you want to have a chatbot deal with stuff or do you want to have a human that are enabled with chatbot that actually helps you to deal with a potential customer, right? So that's really the thing, right? So the way you will design a autonomous chatbot versus the way you would design a assistant that will help a customer service rep are two different design principles. And so the thinking of it is very different than it would be otherwise. You can look at it as even self-driving car, right? So I mean, are you really trying to help the driver or are we trying to replace the driver altogether? Both could be good, bad, or we're not going to even get into the argument. Is it better or is it worse? But when you think about the design aspect of it, is different. Like, stay on your lane. That's one kind of design. And there is AI element of staying on the lane because it's reading the lines from the road and giving you the information. But you're making the decision, right? Car is not making the decision for you. If we replace all of us with everything, writing, customer service, even designing product and services, driving, what happened to all these people?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really the basic principle behind thinking human first, technology second. Technology transcend humanity, not other way around.
Could you give a couple more examples of that? Because that's so interesting, because that's another thing that covering this beat we hear often is like, technologists saying that, no, this is going to help humans work better. It's not going to replace you. Could you give a few more examples?
Of course, any field, and you can argue for it or against it. So think about like a robotics arm doing surgery, sitting next to a surgeon, right? So maybe that robotic surgeon is more precise because human hand shakes or whatever, but it's directed by a doctor who is in the operating table. In that example, you're working in construct with a digital resource and a human resource doing the work. You can apply that even in manufacturing. You can apply that in building design or anything. In any field, you can go to the level where you can say, I'm going to completely replace the people or I'm going to do it in the construct. Where it gets very difficult is who makes the decision, right? And so let's take that operating table and the doctor is saying, well, I'm going to keep trying to survive this patient because my humanity calls for saving the patient. The robotics or the AI is saying, well, the chance of that particular person to survive is maybe 10%. So why even bother, right? So it boils down to this faith and miracle and all the stuff that we talk about. That necessarily not going to be logical. Some cases it's something else, right? So this is where human intervention or human decision factor comes in play. And you can apply that anything. It's like how we interact with each other, how we conduct business, how do we do surgery, how do we interact with, a difficult customer, whatever the case may be. That I think is very difficult to replace that human flaws or the instinct or whatever you want to call it.
Intuition or something.
Intuition, whatever you want to call it. Some people will argue that, well, humans are flawed and we get frustrated, so we make wrong decision. So the machine will be able to make better decision because they don't have that emotion. They don't get tired. They won't get frustrated, so they will make the decision.
It feels like we're in a
sci-fi episode.
Well, I was going to say like a philosophy class in college where they're like, okay, imagine a world where we have to make all of these ethical decisions and this crazy technology is forcing this decision making, and here we are. It's not an exercise in philosophy class, my friends. Like this is
real.
This is real. And I think another thing that pops up a lot in this conversation around AI at work and stuff is, to your point, in the surgery example, there has to be a human who's sort of maybe supervising is the right word, but kind of like, helping make the decisions, okay, great, the robot's doing all this technical stuff. Because we keep hearing over and over, like, AI is going to create jobs that didn't exist. There might be humans who have to teach other humans how to use the AI, or they have to your point, like, double, triple check the AI's work. So could you talk a bit more about that?
Sure. The conversation about is it making us productive or is it making us less productive? That depends on what you're trying to do, right? All the rock stars of tech industry already kind of says that, look, most of the jobs was not going to exist. And you can see that, right? Because AI is generating codes. I come from the tech background. I mean, a lot of the desk job that technologists used to do are already getting replaced, right? You could, as an editor, start by saying, hey, compare this with this. Does it fit in this category? Blah, blah, blah. The real challenge is that how far do we go where there are lesser opportunities? And if you look at the next generation, the people who are just coming out of college or whatever, you can also look at middle management because the middle management used to do a lot of these things and make the decision. What happens to that? So my argument is that, we talked about the human-centric design, is that if we don't focus on elevating the people, what will happen is that in large enterprises, you're going to lose the institutional knowledge as you start losing this middle management, because the middle management are the one who actually does the operational work. The strategy and the ideas or the funding usually comes from the C-suite and the board, but ultimately the operational stuff happens in the middle management. So there will be an impact on the middle management. And if you lose all the middle management, you're going to lose institutional knowledge in the short term. In the long term, you're going to have a talent gap.
Yeah.
Because the way you get better at things, you start somewhere and then you rise to the rank and then you get to a leadership role, right? And there is absolutely no replacement for lived experience. And you can go to school, you can do all sorts of things, but there's no replacement of lived experience. So if we're not gaining lived experience, how do we create the next generation talent pool, right? So there's a whole conversation around that topic as well. So talked about philosophy, and I mean, we sat and wrote my last book, Transcend. I've been in the space of organizational and enterprise transformation and digital transformation almost 30 years now. This was very difficult to write because we kept going back to psychology, philosophy, ethics, and the human impact, and then ultimately economic impact, which, whether you talk to Jeffrey Hinton or whether you talk to Elon Musk or whoever, or even Anthropic CEO is now talking about how many jobs are going to be replaced, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a real crossroad. Whatever we do in next 3 to 5 years is going to have a significant impact of human history going forward.
Okay, let's let that sit for a moment. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Let your imagination run wild here, but what could things look like in 3 to 5 years?
I mean, that depends what we do, right? So let's fast forward 10 years, right? So, we are having a generational shift in our workforce, right? Because you got new generation of people are coming in. A lot of people are at a retirement age. And for some reason, it feels that generational change is kind of happening a lot faster than it was maybe 5-10 years ago. So you're losing this whole knowledge base. And then you're not giving opportunity to the younger generation because a lot of the job apparently going to taken over by AI. So what happens? So you got a whole bunch of people that are unemployed, right? And so if we say, look, we're already talking about creating billion-dollar companies with 5 people. So you're creating wealth, but you're not really creating wealth for a whole bunch of people. It's a handful of people.
Right, yeah.
But how does mathematically it make sense when you have all of these people that are unemployed and a handful of people who has wealth? So there will be a wealth gap between people who has wealth and who doesn't have wealth. And you're going to have a lot of unsatisfied younger generation. In a geopolitical context, if you look at most conflict zones, all the conflict zones happens where young people does not have opportunity. I mean, you can predict a very dark scenario where younger people does not have opportunity and you have conflict zone and revolution happening all over the place and handful of people are holding on to the wealth. I mean, already there's a wealth disparity.
Yeah,
that
right,
we talk about all day long.
Yeah.
But this is going to push that wealth disparity even farther. Right? So you can have a pretty significant disastrous scenario 10 years from now if we don't put checks and balance in terms of governance, usage, replacement, the social impact, economic impact. And already you see how we are manipulating each other meaning globally, with technology, right? You can't even hardly tell what's real anymore. Right. And it's only going to get worse. And you're also seeing the different philosophy in legislation. You look at one kind of philosophy in US, another kind of philosophy in Europe, another kind of philosophy in China and in Russia and other places. So, we're all chasing the AI race. It's a really national security concern in many ways, right? So I personally think that if we think that uncertainty is kind of part of our DNA today, I think we're going to be dealing with uncertainty for a foreseeable future. And if leaders and people, all of us, don't start thinking about it deeply, going back to the philosophy notion, I think we're in trouble.
Are you more nervous or hopeful?
Depends on the day. I'm hopeful when I see drug discovery gets a lot faster. I have a son who is a cancer survivor. So my hope is that we will be able to come up with actual cure for diseases like cancer. I see people who has learning disability can learn better because you can take a textbook and create a different kind of learning environment very quickly. So there's lots of example that could completely change the way we live, the way we communicate, the opportunity to learn, et cetera, et cetera. But I also see all the bad stuff that we're not really paying attention. We tolerate a lot of things. Like look at social media, right? I mean, we have tolerated the bad stuff on social media years after years, despite all the research repeatedly shown the impact on the younger generation and people who are underage and et cetera. We haven't paid attention to it. Now it's like a pandemic almost.
Right.
So if we are not paying attention to AI's bad impact, world could become a very uncontrollable place before we know it. And the acceleration and the opportunity to world becoming a very dangerous place is a lot more than anything else we have seen.
I want to pivot back to talking more about like how organizations are going to grapple with rolling out AI. Particularly, you mentioned the ROI of it all. Yeah. It kind of sits weird to be like, we're talking about these huge, heady topics about like, what's the fate of humanity as this technology becomes more prevalent. But then it's also like, well, how do companies make money off of it? Like people also talk about the AI bubble that may or may not happen. Yeah. That would have impacts both, obviously for the business world, but for larger society. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit more about how organizations can implement AI in a way that will help their business and then help society, question mark?
Yeah, no, look, even though we're talking about these very broad topics, I think it's very interconnected, right? Because it starts with purpose, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, if you look at, let's say I manufacture doors and windows, and that's my business. I'm a but my doors and windows are highly specialized, right? So think about how does a company like that monetize utilization of AI? You can say, okay, well, I'm going to give tools whereby the homeowner or a commercial developers can look at their blueprint and look at their construction and see where my doors and window fits. It's a simple example, but that has a huge value add to the doors and windows that I'm already making, and it makes the usage of my doors and window very accessible to my customer. And it's error proof because I'm not trying out physically this and that, and there's a lot of opportunity with AI. But if my purpose is that I want to continue push the quality and the use of customer and the use of implementation of my doors and window, and that's my purpose as the company, then I'm very much purpose-driven utilization of AI. I'm not trying to say, how do I cut cost for my manufacturing plant? I'm saying, how do I elevate my unique value proposition and my authentic value that I bring to the table by taking advantage of commodity technology, whereby AI is becoming a commodity technology. So the first way of thinking, how do you take AI in your organization from a business point of view, you start with your purpose. And we have seen repeatedly that even though it doesn't becomes obvious from the offset, but purpose-driven organization in the long run does very well. Whether that's Patagonia, and you look at things like Starbucks moving back to where they started, or you look at Apple, right? I mean, any of these very successful organizations, they are very much focused on their purpose. And the purpose is not, how do I create more efficiency? It's how do I serve my customer better by highlighting my authentic value that I bring to the table. It starts there. And then you have to say, okay, what is the maturity of my organization in terms of my customer base, my people that works for me, the supply chain model that I have in place where I'm dealing with different kind of supplier, and the market that I need to take this product to, because there's a maturity in terms of accessibility, adoption, culture, different way of thinking. So you can actually walk through a maturity model of an organization from this 360 view, and you can say, okay, I may have a great idea, but my customers are not really ready for that kind of automation. Or my customer is ready for that kind of automation, but culturally, we just don't do it that way. So you have to calibrate the AI implementation from that maturity. And not to mention that there's all sorts of legacy system and technology that exist in any kind of enterprise that you have to kind of integrate this new technology, because data and the process and the people are still coming from you. And from a consumer point of view, it's easy to say, oh, I can load this up on ChatGPT, or I can load this up on Claude and it writes something taking from the internet. That's not how most enterprises are. Enterprises exist because they have their own value prop that they're bringing to the customer. In some cases, you have actually opportunity to completely bypass your maturity and leapfrog because this new technology gives you that opportunity. So it starts like really analyzing your current state and where your maturity is, and creating an architecture. And I'm not talking about technology architecture, a business architecture that's very purpose-driven, right? And then you map that purpose with the utilization of technology and then apply. All the stuff that I just said, this requires deep thinking. It requires a pause. It requires thinking about a holistic way of looking at it, and then looking at different opportunity and creating a portfolio of experimentation, because some of the things are not going to work. Some of the things are going to work. Some of the things are going to be way ahead of its time. Some cases, you're not going to have the data to support whatever you're trying to do. So you have to come up with the opportunity portfolio, and then you can look at that portfolio and experiment with that. And then you can say, okay, we experimented with 10 different things and 2 of them really make sense. And this is what we're going to roll out in the short term, and this is what we're going to roll out in the long term. So this requires a very much of an architected, deep thinking, which is driven by philosophy, ethics, purpose, as much as technology, process, and everything else outside impact of geopolitics or economy, whatever you're talking about. So if all of us did that, then you're going to have a better chance of humanity, because at the end of the day, at least when you talk about free economy or the capitalistic structure, I mean, its whole society is run by enterprises, right? Small enterprise, large enterprise. When those things starts falling apart, then whole society falls apart, right? So businesses are, at the end of the day, are going to be a major driver what happens to humanity.
Whew, okay, meditate on that one, listeners. That actually sets me up well for the last thing I want to talk to you about is, you mentioned this idea of being purpose-driven. Like, that's another thing in business journalism we hear all the time. Like, companies they value authenticity and we have a purpose, but it sounds like where AI is concerned, that's a legit thing that they need to keep in mind in order to obviously like have a successful business as they implement this technology, but also like, are we doing something of like value add to society, hopefully? Because one thing I wanted to ask you was, let's say if you had two companies that are all other things equal, they have access to the same technology, and maybe this goes back to the human-centric design principle, but what would one of those companies need to do in order to find success that the other might not be able to find?
Look, I mean, it actually applies to companies, but it applies to individuals, right? So take a simple example of you write, I write, both of us write. And we have access to same set of AI tools, the consumer AI tools, right? But if I go on ChatGPT or let's say Claude or whatever tech you use and say, write me an article about human-centric design, and then it will draw out something and so we're both doing this exercise. Now, with my experience, I may go back and say, well, but I have encountered this. Can you incorporate this thought process? And it will change it, right? So this is where that my authentic life experience, whether that's an individual, whether that's an organization, comes in play. So in that context, all those tools are basically commodity, right? Because you have same access as I do, but my output will be very different than your output because you're infusing your lived experience, right? So if I open up a coffee shop, I can say to AI, come up with a business plan for a coffee shop, and it kind of looks like Starbucks.
Yeah.
Well, then I will create a Starbucks, and people are not going to come to my Starbucks. People may come to my coffee shop because I added something that's uniquely a different value than what Starbucks does, as an example. So even though it's buzzwordy, meaning purpose and authenticity, you can actually see how it applies in real life in just these two simple examples that I just given, right? So I think the opportunity is to hone and elevate what we individually bring as an individual, but also as an organization, and elevate that. And I think the winners are going to be who knows how to use it, but who also knows how to tap into that authentic whatever that we bring to the table and elevates that. And the more we focus on that, I think the more opportunity there is.
Well, Faisal, thank you so much for chatting about this with us today.
I had fun. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we're back with Pavithra, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each one of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following right now, business or otherwise. Pavithra, since you're our guest, what are you keeping tabs on?
I have been keeping tabs on the America's Next Top Model documentary, which I think many people have been engaged with.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, okay, great. I'm curious what you think, but I will say an interesting watch, but I do think it let Tyra Banks off the hook on many counts, which is also interesting because she had nothing to do with it, did not produce it or any of that. It was like tough on her in some ways, but then I think like she kind of sidestepped a lot of their questions, which was interesting. But overall, I just, the show was very of its time.
Yeah.
But the documentary really reminded me just how weird and problematic, of course, it was. And that people also like didn't really understand what it meant to be on reality TV at that time. So it was an interesting look back at that period.
2000s reality TV was a whole other kettle of fish between like Flavor of Love and like Shot at Love and Jersey Shore, and like it was crazy. I had a lot of friends who watched America's Next Top Model, and I knew that Tyra, like I had seen the memes of like, we were all rooting for you or whatever she's told it.
Yeah.
And then I saw like the memery, and then it was like, oh, like but you're saying, did she come off as badly as people were bracing for? Or
Tyra comes off pretty bad, I think, in it.
Tone deaf, yeah.
I think the problem more with Tyra is, obviously we don't have the raw tape. We're not seeing what the producers or interviewers are pushing her on. but she was very on message, I'll say, with
Yes.
a lot of her things. And so it is sort of interesting. I think the way that they set it up and juxtaposed and sort of did the classic like show not tell stuff with Tyra, and then used the Jays to inform the storyline.
Yeah.
I think ultimately painted a pretty bad picture of Tyra. She very much did not engage in a lot of the more negative stuff, or was very like, yeah, if I look back on it, you know what I do. Was it bad? Yes. Would I do anything differently? No, because
No.
we were groundbreaking and we did all of these amazing things, and it was very on message. It was very political, which, you know, for all of Tyra Banks' faults, like, she's incredibly charming. Like,
Absolutely.
you can see why it was such a success and why she played out. But the stuff they did was bananas.
Oh, it was
like the
crazy,
race
yeah.
swap photo shoot
Oh, yeah.
that they did and got a lot of pushback for. And then 3 seasons later, did it again.
Yeah.
They did it twice.
And what's funny is I think they're like, well, you know, and looking back, you know, it was a different time. And I'm like, it was a different time. I do think that's true.
It was 2005.
Right. And also, they got plenty of blowback for that at the time. Like, it's not like people thought that was normal.
They did. Yeah, that is the thing. Like, a show of its time, I do think, like, I it's a little bit like how I think of, like, I'm watching Love is Blind's new season, of course.
Oh, I mean, same.
And I was texting Yaz about this, and I was just like, the documentary that's going to be made about Love is Blind, like 10, 15, 20 years from now, is going to be wild. And it's going to be the same thing as the America's Next Top Model reality check documentary, where, you know, Nick Lachey and Vanessa Lachey are going to be like, you know, looking back, it was a different time and we were doing things then, but like, I'm just like indexing right now. Like, we all know this is wrong now.
Yeah.
Like, we all know this is insane now. So the revisionist history around America's Top Model, I'm like, it was a long time ago, the mid 2000s, but I'm pretty sure we weren't cool with blackface then. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
No.
So that also like rings pretty hollow. I never watched the actual series while it was happening. My wife did, and we watched the documentary, and I was just kind of like blown away by.
Yeah.
Like, I knew a little bit, but like, it's crazy.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty wild. I watched actually, the documentary made me realize I watched more of it than I thought I did. Like, it's like, I remember half of these photo shoots. Oh, God. But yeah, it was weird at the time. It's still kind of alarming. But the show was huge. I mean,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, it was very entertaining, but I think you really get the sense that they were invested in the show and not so much these girls. Yeah.
The people.
Let me ask you this. Why did they call them cycles, not seasons?
Oh, I have no idea. That was
No
ridiculous.
idea.
No clue.
Because like back in the day, it was like, ooh, people were like, ooh, cycle 3. I'm like, cycle what? Like washing machine? What? Like just say season. Like why is this show so up its own ass? You have seasons, not cycles. That would always, again, I've literally never, I've seen like a quarter of an episode in my life, so I don't know what I'm talking about. I just know that they call them cycles, and I don't enjoy that.
It's very weird. Yeah, I don't understand that. Brian, what are you keeping tabs on?
Well, speaking of reality TV, and it wouldn't be me showing up on the podcast if we don't talk about The Traitors. But like, so The Traitors finale is on Thursday. Now, Pavithra, have we ever talked about this? Are you a Traitor?
We have talked about it, and I have weirdly not gotten into Traitors, but you'll get me there, I think.
I'm not going to spoil it for anybody listening, but I just know that I want to shout out Rob Roush. I had seen like Love Island, kind of like America's Next Top Model. I've only seen like a couple episodes. I tried to get into it. I knew that he was from Love Island. Everyone underestimated him on the show, but he has just been so good. Like, he's just such like a smart, like emotionally attuned.
Him and Candace saved the season.
I was sad that Candace went. She seemed pretty. And then Real Housewives.
It was the right time for her to go. Like, I think in the storyline arc, because like the first few episodes were kind of a dud.
Yeah.
But the back half of the season, I think, is really picked up. I think the Johnny Ware, Tara Lipinski storyline stuff and what played out last week with Natalie was a great round table. And then like Rob has just played the game so well, and Candace was such a good foil to him that it really picked up the season.
Okay, the Johnny and Tara thing, that's the pivot into the other thing I've been keeping tabs on that I'm very sad that has also ended is the Winter Olympics. I have been obsessed. So this is the real thing. This is the real thing I've been keeping tabs on, which is I've always been appreciative of figure skating. I don't really know anything about it. I never followed it, but I know that these people are like literal magicians doing ninjutsu while balancing on like blades, on doing death-defying things on solid ice. And like there's the artistry. I just got like super into it, like for real, this Winter Olympics cycle. And obviously it was like really trippy listening to Johnny and Tara like commentate after getting to know them better on the traders. But I am obsessed. I am obsessed with Alyssa Liu. I'm obsessed with Ilya Melanin. I got all my people. I have Riku Miura and Yuichi Kihara from Japan. They were the couple who were like way behind the short program, and then they won gold. And oh my God, it was amazing. My boy Adam Xiaohimfa, I think is how I may have butchered that. He's from the French team. I'm obsessed. But and I think Pavithra, you know this about what's happened to me recently, because you guys should be lucky I'm here because I'm infirmed right now. I'm very, very physically hurt because I sprained my leg in a horrific.
This is the wildest keeping tabs.
Right? We're going everywhere. I love it.
We're going everywhere.
You sprained your ankle?
High
ankle
I don't
sprain
even know
or
what
low
I did.
ankle sprain?
Wait, you don't know yet?
I actually don't know what I did. But I just
thought
know
it was your knee.
Go to urgent care.
Yeah, I feel like you have to figure this out.
So wait, this is what happened. So I'm watching all these figure skaters, and it just inspired me to like not get bad at it, because like I literally like, guys, I'm like holding the wall. I can't ice skate, so I'm like holding the wall. I have to get the little like penguin push cart that they have for like toddlers, right? Like, and so I decided to go ice skating like a week ago, and I was like, oh man, this is the best I've ever done. I haven't fallen down once. I haven't even touched the wall that many times. And then the last 5 minutes, by the way, the ice is like melting for some reason. Like people around me are like commenting on this, like, wow, these are slushy conditions. Like this probably should have been my cue to like get off the slippery ice, but I just decided to skate around the massive puddle that was accumulating on the rink. And lo and behold, I like the last freaking 5 minutes of the skate, I like eat it, you guys. And I mean like pigeon pose onto the ice with my left leg. Like it went, my left foot was like up by my ear. Like it was crazy. And literally speaking of urgent care, I mean, the first thing I thought was like, okay, like urgent care, are they open on President's Day? I'm not going to be able to walk at work. Like what? But then it was, but it wasn't that bad. But yeah, I had a brush with death.
Clearly.
And now I'm here talking to you guys. So it's been a roller coaster.
And you did it just to figure skate.
What I wouldn't give for video of you eating shit.
Right? In the pigeon pose. Just sliding in pigeon pose.
You know what? I tried, but I was like, you know what? Think of all the falls that these Olympians, this inspired me, and I'm stronger for it. So anyway, so you guys can keep lookout for the 2030 games in the French Alps, and I want you to help me think of what music my short program is going to be set to.
Haven't watched a single second of the Olympics. Couldn't be fucked. Couldn't be bothered. Don't care.
Oh no, I'm obsessed. I love the Olympics. I'm just so sad that now I need to figure out with figure skating. Now I need to figure out how to watch it when it's not the Olympics. So if anyone in the comments, like someone at me, because I need guidance. I'm such a noob.
Oh, it's all the time. Every time I visited my grandmother growing up on Sunday, there'd be figure skating on.
Oh wow!
If figure skating wasn't on, it'd be bowling. Yeah, so I watched a lot of figure skating in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I've only ever watched it during the Olympics, so I guess it does exist otherwise, too. So.
No, that's what I'm trying to figure.
There was a time in my life where I knew a lot about figure skating. Let's get out of this. Okay, my keeping tabs. Have you both seen Punch the Monkey, the macaque?
No.
Oh, you haven't seen Punch?
I don't think so.
Okay, so Punch the macaque, it's a baby monkey in a zoo in Japan who was abandoned by his mother and put into the zoo.
I have seen this.
And given a plush orangutan that he is now just bonded with. So now he's in this zoo. getting bullied by other macaques in the enclosure and then just like clinging to this stuffed orange orangutan for comfort. It is the cutest thing in the world, and I can't stop thinking of my dogs every time I see this little monkey. But what I'm keeping tabs on, because this is a business podcast, we have to have a business angle. The stuffed orangutan, it's an IKEA product. It's an IKEA, I cannot pronounce the name of it, De Jungle Skog plush orangutan. And it sells for like $20 at IKEA. In like Japan, South Korea, the United States, it has been selling out like crazy. So much so that the new CEO of IKEA has commented on it and was like, this is, one of our best selling products. Well, we've certainly seen a bump in it. I was like, all right, dude, you haven't been selling this many stuffed plush orangutans at IKEA. But what's crazier is the resale market started to kick up. So on eBay, resales of this IKEA $20 plush orangutan have been going for like $250, $300, $350 of people selling this viral stuffed orangutan just because of Punch, the bullied macaque in Japan, which is just some late stage capitalism shit.
Sure is. That's fascinating. And now I'm oh my God, these photos. This is adorable.
It's so cute. It's so cute. And he's getting bullied by other macaques, and he's got this stuffed orangutan that he's carrying everywhere.
I mean, that's the real story. What is the zoo going to do to address this toxic workplace?
It's true. Bringing it back to work life.
And
For
full
real.
circle with our work life themes.
Get these other macaques on a group Zoom.
They need a union.
I'm going to patch in HR. We got to get to the bottom of this.
We're going to have a harassment training at the Ikikawa City Zoo.
Yeah.
That's a great place to end it. Pavithra, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you.
That's it for Most Innovative Companies. Our show is produced by Blake Odom, Sam Gebauer, Hawa Atori, and Mariam Kiporuitse. Editing by Matt Toder, mix and sound design by Tad Wadhams and Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is me. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we will see you next week.